Hello and welcome. I'm super excited you're here. I wanted to create an opportunity to find out what I mean when I talk about bliss-based excellence, because it's a term that I've come up with and that I'm repeatedly putting out there, but that I haven't yet really explained in terms of what I mean. And so I thought that for today, just very briefly, I will talk about what it means to excel blissfully and also how we can do that, whether on our own or with someone else, just to kind of understand it in more practical terms. So I've got a few little slides that aren't that crucial, but that might be helpful. So I will just briefly open them. There we go. All right, so bliss-based excellence. What's that? Before we get into what that looks like, it might be nice to see what typical ways of achievement tend to look like. This might not be true for everyone, but on the whole, this seems to be what I call the cycle of achievement that I very often see in students, clients, friends that are all high achievers, that are internally driven, really ambitious, that know that they like to aim high, that like to set themselves goals that seem a little bit unreasonable. And then once they reach them, the next goal is already in sight or is already kind of in the process of being achieved as well. And so what it often can look like to achieve goals repeatedly in that way is illustrated by the basic cycle of achievement that I've put together to sort of show the stages. And you might recognize yourself in some aspects of it or in all. So just take from this what resonates and what doesn't, just leave it. Normally, we start the basic cycle of achievement by perceiving a need to achieve. This can be a need to achieve that is projected onto us from external circumstances. So it might be when we were growing up that people in our environment would kind of explicitly tell us that we needed to achieve certain things. Graduating school, for instance, is a common one that most families will have placed a high value on for their children, and where most parents also were dealing with a lot of fears, thinking about the repercussions of potentially their child not attaining a degree of a high school or any sort of secondary school, and what that might mean for their future trajectory. So this is often when we've first been exposed to a need to achieve that has been externally put on us. And for good reasons. We might have different views on how important a good education is and for whom it might matter more than for other people, but it is a very understandable desire from a parent to make sure that their child is set up in the best possible way to thrive in life. But in addition to this externally put on need to achieve, we also often have this internal need to achieve. And very often we might even, if we identify with being a high achiever, or if we're on our way to becoming a high achiever, we might even have had situations where our environment was a little bit puzzled and didn't quite understand why we were pushing ourselves so hard and why it seems like we were deliberately choosing the harder path if we were at a choice point. And where we might not even be fully able to articulate or explain what's pushing us, what's kind of the internal fire that's guiding us, but we just know we want to do something big. In and of itself, there's absolutely nothing wrong with any of this, and it's actually quite exciting if you have that internal fire. So I would never want to discourage anyone from that. However, what often happens when we perceive this need to achieve, we fall into one or two camps, and you might see yourself fluctuating between the two as well. But in the one hand, we have the pragmatic type of person that will just take action straight away, hastily, go at it and do as much as they can in the direction of that goal that they've just created for themselves, so that has been put in front of them. That can work. The hastily is the hint that it does not always produce such efficient and effective results as alternative strategies might, but it's not a bad way. And the type of person, and this might also vary across different domains, so it's not like one individual is like this and another it's not. You might be like one type in one area of life and you might act a little differently in another. But this type of approach can be beautiful because it kind of prevents all the mental blocks that sometimes make us pause and not really get started. We just get in it and we start. Nothing wrong with that. Alternatively, we might think, oh, this thing that I'm trying to achieve seems rather big, or it seems unfamiliar. I haven't done it yet. I don't quite know how. I'm a little scared. What if it doesn't work? So oftentimes we procrastinate. And there's different reasons why we procrastinate. It's always an emotional issue rather than some rational or some lack of willpower, which often in the media is portrayed as just like a lazy person. I don't think that's true at all. There's a lot of evidence suggesting that that's not true at all. The opposite is actually true, that oftentimes the more perfectionist, the more ambitious we are, and the higher the goals that we've set for ourselves, the more likely we are to procrastinate, because as long as we haven't yet started, we also haven't yet failed. So there's still the potential of it succeeding by not starting. So bit of a logical flaw in there, but this is how many of us process subconsciously being faced with a new task. And so we procrastinate and don't do it, do other things, but not fully enjoying these other things, because in the back of our mind, we feel like we ought to be moving towards a goal and we're not. So it's creating more unpleasant feelings along the way. And either way, whether you are in the procrastination camp or whether you've already taken action hastily, normally there comes a point where you have to take stock and evaluate. If you've been procrastinating, it's quite easy to see, I've got this goal, maybe there's some sort of time limiter on it. And here we are moving through time, and yet I'm not really making any progress. So you get alert system things going on in your brain where there seems to be a mismatch between what you say you were going to do and what you're actually doing, which is causing cognitive dissonance and makes us very unhappy. At the same time, if you take action hastily, quite often we have this tunnel vision. We put our blinders on and we're like working a little bit with our head down, just moving. And then at some point we might look up and we might realize that, yes, we've taken action. We've done quite a lot. We've worked a lot. We might already be a little bit exhausted, but perhaps the way we've gone about this wasn't the most intelligent way. It wasn't very deliberate. It wasn't planned. It was just kind of going for it. We may have already made a couple of mistakes. We may just question our way of going about it and thinking that, if we had started differently, we would have produced a different result. And that also puts us in a pickle, because it's almost like, okay, given how far I've already come and how much effort I've put in, how much is it worth going back and redoing it properly? Can I live with the mistakes I've made? What does that mean for the attainment of my goal? So we also have a moment of taking stock and maybe noticing, this is not the linear path to the goal that I would have had in mind, but I haven't really put time into working it out in advance. And now here we are kind of halfway there, but not really, because it's not in the way that I would have envisioned. So once we reach the second step, normally the result in both cases is that we have an increased perception of this pressure to achieve, because we still have the goal. We've been carrying that around with us. And this works in both a short and also a longer time scale. So whether this is something you'd like to achieve within a given day, and you take stock at 3 p.m. and you're like, how much of what I wanted to do have I actually done? Versus how much of what I've already done was actually sensible in terms of what I wanted to achieve. Or whether this is a long-term goal that might extend over a number of years, whether this is finishing a program at university, whether this is building a house, whether this is building a business, or all those sorts of longer term projects. When we notice that we're not on track, because we either haven't really moved as quickly as we wanted to, or we've not quite moved in the direction or in the way that we've been wanting to, the pressure increases, because the goal is still activated in our system. We still know what we want, and we feel this need to get there very, very quickly. And now we feel like we've messed it up because we're not quite where we should be at this point in time. So the result of this increased pressure to achieve, going backwards, is often then that we overwork and succeed. Of course, there's an alternative. We might resign, give up, not finish. I'm talking to the high achievers who have gone through the cycle and who somehow don't quite know how, but who kind of always manage to pull it off in the end. And I know that that might not be true for you always, but you may have had at least one example that comes to your mind where it's been a bit of a struggle, but somehow you've made it work, right? So I'm talking about this type of achievement, because it's not the basic cycle of giving up, it's the basic cycle of achievement. So typically we get into this sort of work mode, which can feel good. So if the more you've done this, the more you're used to succeeding, this can feel really good to our system, because it's almost like a familiar mindset that we get into, and we can be like in the zone. If you've ever studied hard for an exam, for instance, for a number of days, you may have had a schedule that was just revolving around getting up, doing work, trying to even like schedule meals and showers in some instances, because you're so like in it to win it. Similarly, if you're pushing yourself physically, you might just like be really focusing on whatever it is that you're trying to achieve in the time frame that you've set for yourself. And it can feel really good because you're establishing this routine where you might feel a bit like a machine, where you're just sort of like in this rhythm that you've created, and you're going for it, and you're actually moving forward, and you see yourself moving forward. And yeah, there's, you know, ups and downs, and there's still these moments where you think, oh, I'll never manage, it's not as good as it could be. I don't know, I'm a fool for not starting earlier, or I'm a fool for having just blindly started and not really thought it through effectively. Any of those things might come up, but you're just going at it. For some people, it's all-nighters. For other people, it's getting up really early. For most of us, it means giving up other areas of life. So maybe spending less time with friends and family, devoting less time to hobbies or other activities that normally spark joy. Really this sort of like eyes on the prize mentality. And then we succeed, which is exciting, right? So once we've succeeded, we do experience this moment of joy and of pride, because as you see with this cycle, there's ups and downs involved. Like there's moments where it looks like it won't happen. There's moments where self-doubt's coming up, maybe also negative feelings towards ourselves, being reproachful, not being too nice, and kind of like whipping ourselves through it. So once we've achieved it, we might be like, oh my God, I can't believe it, yoo-hoo, and you get really, really, really excited. However, this moment of pride and joy tends to be really short-lived, and depending on how long you've been working towards something, it can feel just disproportionately small. If you're thinking about putting years into something and you finally get it and you're super happy about it and you can't believe it and you're stoked, the amount of time you're going to spend in that kind of hyper, really excited, your whole body is like tingling inside, that feeling, it's just like a split second from the entire time it took you to get there. So once it subsides and it kind of, you know, the waves become smaller and it goes away, we then notice that we feel exhausted, and we often also notice that we feel a little empty. So sometimes when I work with clients and also with students, there's this sense of shame around this, and it almost feels like, oh, it's not allowed, like I shouldn't be feeling empty, and I don't really want to say it, and I'm going to downplay it and say like, oh, you know, a little lost, and not make it a big deal. But it's really common. So I want to shine a light on that not being an unusual reaction, because if you think about it, once you've entered this cycle, right, like you're starting from a need. So already something's at stake there in your head. If you have a need to achieve, your brain's going to take this as something that is really crucial, in an extreme way, to your survival. Now, on the face of it, that might not be true. If you have a little goal that you're trying to achieve in a day, of course, this is not a life or death matter. However, as soon as we're categorizing it as a need to our system, it seems like we really do need it. And so it gets entered into a category that makes our nervous system alert, and that makes us very prone to the whole fight, flight, freeze response, rather than the alternative, which is the rest and digest and restore mode. And while we're going through the cycle, if you're taking action hastily, you're expending a lot of energy already. If you're not taking energy out in terms of working, if you're procrastinating, it might look like you're not expending energy, but a lot of energy gets absorbed in this idea of I should and I don't, I ought to, yet I'm not doing it. That is very, very strenuous in our system, because it's constantly arguing with yourself. So picture yourself having an argument. That takes a lot out of us, doesn't it? If you have a constant argument with yourself that goes over an extended period of time, you can imagine how that might affect your energy levels. The perceived pressure to achieve, once you perceive the increased pressure, that will also, if you haven't already been in it, switch on the fight, flight, a freeze response even more. And then the overworking tends to be the time where we most neglect our basic needs. So things like sleep, I said earlier, like, you know, pulling all-nighters, getting up really early, or whatever else you might be doing, might affect your sleep, might affect your eating habits. You might not care so much about what you eat and when you eat and how much you eat in either direction. Things like spending time with friends or activities that you enjoy, which also really contribute to replenishing our energy, we often do without. And so as a result of these factors and more, yes, we have that moment of joy, and it's this like elevated experience of we've made it, we've done it, woohoo. And then we get to feel what our body actually feels like, because before it's done us a huge favor of blocking it all out and letting us really, really focus and numbing our perception of anything else that isn't conducive to us reaching this goal. And in addition, the feeling empty just arises from this rhythm you've created for yourself and this routine you've been in that seems to have been necessary to achieve the goal, but now the goal is there. You have no reason to maintain this regimen of like, you know, really like working hard. But because you've done that, because you've made that familiar to your system now doesn't quite know what to do because the structure is gone. You had a very tight framework, a very like controlling structure of your days, and now that's fallen off you. So there's a moment of, I don't even know like who I am, what I'm doing, where I'm going. I'm talking in rather extreme times. You might be experiencing this on a smaller scale, but you might also know exactly what I'm talking about. So either way, it's totally fine. What happens in that stage is that we are unsettled, because what we grow up thinking and what we really deeply believe, most of us at least, is that when we achieve a goal, our happiness level increases. This is the basic idea, right? Like, I don't have something, I have a need to have it. Once I have it, I will feel better. Makes sense, sounds sensible. This is true for I don't have food, I need food. There's food, woohoo, I feel better. This is true, same for sleep, all these like basic things. However, for anything that is not basic, like a necessity for survival, it doesn't quite work that way, because what we experience here is a contradiction. Like, we've achieved the goal. However, when we're checking in with our physical body, we feel tired, we feel exhausted, we feel depleted. And when we check in with our kind of mental state and our well-being, we feel a little empty. Our sense of identity is a little shaken up, and our sense of self-worth is also a little bit in the air, because we had assumed that meeting this goal would enhance it. But here we are a little lost and confused. So that didn't really work. It didn't do the trick. What do we do now? It might be sensible at this point to question the basic cycle of achievement, because you've now just shown yourself, you've provided evidence that running after a goal and getting it doesn't produce the results you anticipated. So we might think, let's put that in the bank of experiences and let's apply that to the next situation. That might be the case for some of us. What often happens instead is that from this stage of feeling exhausted and a little empty, we perceive a novel need to achieve. So what happens is, let's say, I really think, and this is very far away from my own personal life, which if you know me, you will know. Let's say I assume getting a fancy, flashy car would be the one thing that would make me happy. It's not true. I don't even drive. But let's pretend I want, I don't know, a Ferrari. I'm really into Ferraris. I want one. And I think when I've got this Ferrari, I will just be so happy. What do I need to get it? Well, I need a driver's license. I have a driver's license. I don't drive though. So I might then think, if I can't drive the car, that's a bit silly. So I need to like practice driving. I might practice driving like I know nothing else, and I do it day and night, and like people fear for their life in the process. But in the end, I feel like I can do it, right? Nice. Then I need the money to buy the car. So let's say I don't have the money. So then I have to think about how can I come up with the money? I have to make a plan. I have to work hard. And then maybe let's say I put a crazy deadline on it, and I say by Christmas Eve, I want to have my Ferrari with a big red bow. This is my only reason for living. This is super important to me. So I go for it. I work super hard. I work nights. I take extra jobs. I do things I would never really want to do. I scrub, with my hands on the floor day and night, working super hard, blah, 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 blah. I get the car. Woohoo! Who would have thought? I didn't think it was possible. Nobody else would have thought it was possible, but I've made it. Super big moment. I am feeling elated. I'm so happy. I see the Ferrari. It has the red bow. I sit in it. I drive around. Nobody dies. We have a great time. Sounds great, doesn't it? But then I noticed that just because I have the car doesn't actually mean I'm this really content, happy, go lucky person, because I thought initially that once I will have the car, my life will be complete. I finally have what's missing. And now I notice that I don't feel that way. I'm actually really exhausted. I worked really hard. I feel a little bit empty because I was like doing all these jobs, all these driving lessons at the same time. And now I have the car, and that's great, but I'm not driving it every single moment of my life. And if I look at myself in the mirror, like, still the same Mary. So that's a little uncomfortable, isn't it? If you think about investing a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money, a lot of energy into something, and then you get it, and then it doesn't quite give you what you thought it would give you, that is a very uncomfortable feeling for any human being, because there's just a disconnect between, like, is it worth it or not? And we thought it would be, and now it looks like it's not. So we really do not like to sit with that. We're just like, I don't like that. I don't like that. So let's say I'm in that situation. I feel confused. I'm not this fulfilled person that I thought I would be, sitting in my red car. And then I just go, well, maybe it was in the car then. Maybe it's a dog. And then I have the need to achieve becoming a dog owner. I'm using examples that are not connected to like professional or educational development, because I think they're like easy and they're a little bit silly. So they help us laugh about it. But this applies to so many different ways that we set goals. So instead of sitting with the realization that our expectation does not match the actual experience, and then drawing some sort of conclusions from that, and thereby changing how we're going to do this in the future, instead we just like pick another goal, and we think that like, well, it wasn't the car, but the dog is really going to make me one happy Mary, and then we go around the cycle again. It seems silly the way I'm saying it. You might think, who would do that? Like that seems ludicrous. But if you think about yourself, if you think about things you've really wanted, and if you think about having gotten them and then going for something else, and sometimes this perceived need to achieve occurs before we even succeed. So you might be at step 4, and while you're overworking towards the current goal that you're anticipating, you already get the sense of like, maybe this isn't it. This isn't the key to like lifelong fulfillment. So while you're still in that process, a little part of you might think like, oh, but that instead, like that will be it. And you might even have examples that seem to almost be a contradiction to what you're going for. I remember when I was about to finish school, there was a time where I was studying a lot. I used to say to friends that I'm gonna, give up this life. I'm gonna move to Australia and like be a hippie and like live on this wombat farm. I don't know if wombats live on farms. I'm not sure. I would be delighted to find out. But it was like this really opposite picture of life to the one that I was currently living, because I was like in the library just like studying a lot. That seemed really, really appealing at the time. And I didn't, like, that's not what happened. Although, part of me still longs to live that life, if that is a possibility at all. But the point being is that often while we're almost finished, we already have an inkling that this is not the solution we were initially yearning for. And then our mind very helpfully comes up with an alternative, and it's like, well, if it wasn't that, maybe it's this. This is like really different. It could be that, right? So in the car dog scenario, for instance, I might think, okay, I thought like the shiny, flashy, big like machine would be the one thing that would make me happy. It wasn't. So what about a small furry friend, which is, alive and like cute and little and like very, very different. So I might fall into the trap of thinking, oh, that's the solution. And then I go around the circle again. And you can do this many, many times. And there are many examples of lives lived that basically reflect this circle. What the goals are differs. They can also be internal goals, they can be external goals, they can be big, they can be small, they can take no time at all to achieve, they can take a lot of time to achieve. On a very small scale, it's scrolling through social media, for instance. Like if you perceive the need to look at the next, if you're going through your Instagram feed, right, like the next post, and you're looking at that on your explore page or something, and then you're just like going through the next one, going through the next one, going through the next one. It's a very, very teeny tiny version of achieving, like knowing more, having seen more, having experienced more, having laughed more, like whatever it might be, and then being like, huh, that wasn't as great as I thought it would be. Oh, maybe the next one will be, right? It's the same thing, just on like a micro level. And on a huge scale, it might be whole jobs or whole careers where you're like, this is it. I know, like from the depth of my heart, I want to be a shepherd. And then you're like out there with the sheep and you're like, oh, I don't like it. And then you think, all right, instead I'm going to be a lawyer. And you go through like all of this training. And then you're the lawyer and you're like, I don't know if I like this. That could be a sort of more dramatic, fairly dramatic. I don't know how many shepherds turned lawyers there are. A way of doing it as well that's more long-term oriented. In any case, you might be able to see that it's not that fulfilling, a circle. Doesn't mean it's wrong. Doesn't mean it's not a good way of achieving things. It relies on the premise that the majority of us fall prey to, that the sort of like no pain, no gain mentality, that in order to be motivated, we need to avoid pain. So if we have a need to achieve, that means there's something we don't have. That's where happiness lies. We're constantly miserable if we don't have it. These might be stories we tell ourselves. And therefore, the only way away from the pain is to temporarily go through more pain, this little circle, to then be free from the pain. That's the idea. And when we notice that the free from the pain is a temporary thing, we get disheartened and then we just like go at it again, because this whole cycle is familiar, and whatever is familiar to us, our system likes, because we know the steps. Even if the steps are uncomfortable, you know where you're going, you know how this is going to go, and you know, like, oh, this is this part of the game where I lose all hope, like I've been here before, you know. We have a sense of being familiar with it, and therefore it doesn't seem that dangerous and no changes required. We might up level the things we achieve, and this way we can achieve wonderful things this way. You can achieve massive professional advances, you can achieve like great, you know, physical goals, you can achieve whole like house remodeling goals, like whatever it might be. The world's your oyster. You can keep going with this. There's nothing wrong with it. You can be a very high achiever, very high performance consistently. For a lot of people, there'll be health implications along the way. So in dramatic or less dramatic ways, it'll show that this is not as fulfilling as it seems. But even that might not be true for everyone. What is true is this kind of fear of being still, fear of being with yourself, fear of not doing anything, of being, and of just kind of letting yourself be with your thoughts. There's one study that really I find so impressive, which showed that people who were given a choice, they did a task that was really not part of the study, but that like seemed to be the study, you know. It's a deceptive study. And then after the task, there was some time they had to wait before they were talking to someone who was running this study. And one group was given, they were given an option between waiting, doing nothing at all, just sitting by themselves, no devices, nothing to distract themselves with, or they could choose to instead receive electric shocks once in a while. And you'd be surprised to hear that most people actually chose to receive electric shocks rather than being by themselves with their thought, which is a really strong example of us not liking to pause in this cycle and not liking to reflect on how we're actually feeling. A question that I think is really great in just checking in with yourself is that out of a scale of 1 to 10, do you have the energy to do everything you want? And it's quite a good indication that if you're below a 7, you might not optimally use your energy, and you might actually deplete yourself through cycles like these. I've originally come across this from Deepak Chopra, if anyone wants to go into his work and see what he says about that. But it's just a one item question that is not validated. This is from the self-development world rather than from empirical based science, but it is a really nice way of just checking in with yourself. And like that question may make you laugh or like snort with anger, or you might be like, I'm at an 8, which, you know, great. I'm not at an 8. I think it's quite the feat to actually say I've got the energy to do everything that I want to do. But just asking that question might already activate your subconscious and like open the ways for a couple of shifts. So at this point, you might say, okay, I thought we talked about bliss-based excellence. So far, this doesn't seem very blissful. Very well observed. So how does an alternative look? Let's look instead at the bliss-based cycle of achievement. So these are similar steps, but you will see that they are different in little but profound ways. So instead of the need to achieve, we start with the desire to achieve. Why does that matter? You might think this is just a technicality. It's just a different word, Mary. How does that make a difference? Good point. But think it through. If you label something as a need, as I said earlier, it will activate your most primal kind of ways of thinking about it in terms of no matter what, I need to have it, no matter what it takes. So even if I injure myself in the process, it is absolutely essential for me to achieve. That then makes it more understandable if we're in that frame of mind that we're willing to go through periods of sacrifices, potentially harming ourselves by not providing us with the nutrients, with the sleep, with the rest, with the connection that we seek in order to get what we like so desperately need. If we're shifting that into desire, the whole foundation, it seems like a small, I understand if you're like, that's a very small difference. It seems like a very small difference, but the entire foundation of this cycle of achievement is a different one. Because if we desire something, first of all, there's no external pressure. If anything, sometimes we desire things that our external environment will just be really puzzled, if not appalled by, and it's like, how on earth can you desire this? And yes, desire has connotations within the sexual realm as well. So for some people, this word might be a bit like, I don't desire like a high school diploma, right? Fair enough, that's fine. But if we can frame it as a desire rather than a need, it eliminates feeling pressured from the outside, and it also eliminates being pressured from the inside, because it's a choice all of a sudden. And as soon as we're signaling to our brain that something is a choice rather than something we have no control over, we're freeing our mindset in so many ways that has actual implications for your entire body. If you think about something you need to do just today, what do you need to do today? It might be something like brushing my teeth. It might be something huge. It might be something very important, or it might be something where like, well, I really need to do that, but I don't want to, and it not, right? Whatever comes to you in this moment in time, just feel into thinking like, I need to do that. Notice what your body does. Often it goes like, it tenses, it becomes smaller, it becomes tighter. Our face, it might be micro movements, or it might be quite visible. My face is very an obvious face when it feels something, but there's a sense of like, right, like scrunching. We're like shrinking because we don't like the idea and we feel like a lot is at stake. And tensing is also in line with our fight, flight, freeze response, where we're like getting ready either to like fight for it or to run from it if we want to procrastinate for a little while, or, which is the most painful of them all, freeze in space and do nothing, but our inside is going, oh, nobody likes that, right? Now think about something you desire. And it can be small, it can be something that you're looking forward to later today, it can be some like big life goal, anything at all that you just like, I desire that, like with all you've got. It can be sexual, I don't mind, whatever comes to you, right? Whatever you desire. When it's sexual, you might have guilt kind of confounded with it, so watch out for that. Ideally go for something that you would consider a wholesome desire, because that's easier to demonstrate it to you. But if you're thinking about some sort of wholesome desire, like if you think about a beverage, for instance, that you're really looking forward to, or having your face in the sun for a moment, or something really, really tiny and insignificant that maybe to other people seems a bit ridiculous to desire, but that to you, you like really desire, like putting up your feet at the end of the day, like leaning back, just something that you really look forward to. Your body kind of expands as a result. And again, it might be very small and it might be hard to detect, but you can play with this like throughout your day and just catch when you think you need something and notice how your body will go in some ways. And it might also show like nervous movements, right? So when you move your fingers a lot, some people have restless legs, some people like will with their foot kind of like tap on the ground, or you do things with your hair, like all sorts of little ways trying to escape the feeling. It's just the body trying to like get away from experiencing it. Normally there's some sort of contraction. And if you think about desire, your whole system kind of opens up, and your mind will open up to more creative solutions that otherwise you may have not thought about. Your oxygen absorption is actually better in the bloodstream, and your whole muscles are less tense. There's less adrenaline, there's less cortisol. There might still be excitement is great, but it's not fear-based. So I don't recall who said this, but someone said, fear is excitement without the breath, which I think is a really nice quote. And I wish I could remember who I've got it from. But essentially, when we're afraid and when we perceive a need to perform, which inherently will activate our mind thinking of the possibility of disappointing that expectation, normally we breathe in a very shallow way and we're more like kind of like anxious and fearful. Whereas with desire, it's more like breathing quite a lot. So it's similar. There is an internal motivation. We might want to spring into action for both of them, but it is a very different kind of activation of the nervous system that makes all the difference in the long run. Let's see where the perceived desire to achieve will get us next. Two options, same way as before. Either you can take action intelligently. So if it's something that is pretty clear cut in terms of how to best achieve this, this thing or state that you desire, you might already know. Maybe you've done it in the past and you just want to redo it. Maybe you've done it in the past and you've come across some hurdles and now you know about them, or it's pretty straightforward. It doesn't require much thought, but whatever action you take, it's intelligent action. So it's not blind action trying to hastily get somewhere, but it's something that is that makes sense, and that is efficient, and that is effective, and that is in line with where you're going. Because the thing about taking action hastily is very often like the goal is here, but then we kind of just like wildly start running, and then we're like, oh no, we walked too far this way, and then we like course correct, and then we're like, oh no, we're over here. And it's like the idea of putting your head down, running, then you look up and you're like, oh, never mind, that wasn't quite right, and then you turn a little and then you run again, and then you look up and you're like, oh, now I've overshot in like the other direction. You can hear how that's effortful and not super effective. Whereas intelligently might be like, okay, this is the goal, I'm about to do this, is that in line with the goal? Any obstacles I can think of, anyone I need to consult in order to make sure this won't be a problem, any help I need, anything else? No, okay, taking those steps. As you're taking the steps, eyes on the prize, but mindful of the environment. So sometimes we might actually have to go left and then right to get back on track because of an obstacle, and that might be more intelligent than just like climbing the mountain, right? So intelligently taking action makes a big difference to hastily. Or if it's not so straightforward, if you haven't done it before, if it's less clear what action is required, developing a strategy intentionally. Intentionally means with care. Caring is something that a lot of people have an ambiguous relationship with. Like, we like to be cared about, but very often we think it's a higher status thing not to care about something. Like, you know, if you're saying, oh, whatever, I don't care, that is dismissing the value of caring. If we develop a strategy non-intentionally, if we don't care, we very likely won't come up with an effective and efficient one, and we will be in a similar situation to the basic cycle of achievement that I've illustrated earlier. Whereas if we're intentional about the strategy, if the strategy includes time to reflect, if the strategy allows us to think about different possibilities and kind of being able to appraise the risk and the likelihood of the benefits. And if there's time buffers planned in, if you have flexibility, like if you have an overall plan that makes sense in and of itself and that is coherent, but that allows for flexibility at a lot of different points throughout, that's normally an intentional and an intelligent strategy, because you know where you're going, you have a plan of where you go, where you need to go in order to get there, and you've already embedded flexibility. Like, if that doesn't work, then this. If this turns out to be that way, then that. In this case, right? So if it's like a little bit like a tree diagram. And very often we save so much time. I wish I could quantify this. We save so much time by looking at the tree diagram before we actually start running in one direction. Can save us a ton of time. Of course, flip side to this is some people will use that to procrastinate, right? Because you can be like meticulously planning every single detail, never getting started. So there's still a little bit of wiggle room with what that would actually look like. But if you're holding yourself accountable and if you're asking yourself, is this still me developing the strategy intentionally, or is this me putting off work or putting off taking action? Then normally you're onto a winning path. So either way, as you go, you will notice things will not go according to plan. So even though you've taken action intelligently, or you have started developing your strategy intentionally, you will come across moments where it's not going according to plan. You think you should be further along than you are. You feel like you haven't quite gone in the right direction, or you've maybe made mistakes and like they're costly to repair. So what's a crucial step that was not at all part of the basic cycle of achievement is actually to expertly manage both your emotions and your energy. That might seem like a sort of like luxury sprinkle on top of everything else. If you have time, you could do this, but it's not essential kind of thing. I invite you to consider whether that is actually true. Because, as I said earlier, all of this is very much run by emotions. And even the most rational, logical, robot-like among us, deep down, we know that emotions are running the show. I know sometimes we're being dismissive about it. Historically, there's been this gender split about like the man being rational and the woman being emotional, and inherently that being bad to be emotional. I think we've come a long way since then, but those thoughts might still prevail at a subconscious level. So very often we assume that emotions are inferior to reason. There are instances where that's true, right? There are instances where we might have an intuitive emotion and that is actually not in line with the reality. Often this is things where we have a primal reaction that makes sense if we know very little about the world, but that only comes up because we live in a world that is far more complex than what we were originally designed for. And then luckily we have reason to be like, hold on, it's not so simplistic, it's actually quite complex. And although you're having this emotional experience, what that might make you want to do is not quite in line with what's required in the situation, right? So for instance, if you're at the doctor's and they like do something to you that is like slightly painful, reason says this is a necessary step to me getting better overall. Your emotions are going to be like, don't hurt me, I want to leave. Makes total sense. Why wouldn't you feel that way if someone is like deliberately out to hurt you? But then thankfully we have reason kind of higher up in the hierarchy in those cases, right? So of course reason is a wonderful thing. It's really hard to argue against that, and I wouldn't want to. However, emotions are really wise too. And if we dismiss them, if we ignore them, suppress them, or sort of try to force them to be a certain way, they actually play a bigger role in pulling the strings behind the scenes than if we're kind of openly acknowledging them and actively managing them. Same with energy. Different people have different levels of energy, and it might even fluctuate within a day, a week, a month. But we all have a certain amount of energy. And there are ways to amplify the energy, and there's ways to like have even less. If we don't develop a conscious awareness, and if we're not looking at our energy levels, and if we're not becoming attuned to what actually helps me have more energy, or what gives me energy versus what drains me of energy, and knowing these things, how am I going to schedule my day, my life, my kind of existence around those different activities or situations? is really missing out on so much wisdom, on so much kind of ease with which you get to achieve if you are taking them on board, and if you're becoming an expert in navigating and actively managing them to your advantage, so that your emotions become like one of the biggest helpers you've got. Because emotions can be transmuted into so many powerful gifts that I'm happy to talk about at a different point in time. But becoming an expert in managing them, which means increasing your awareness, navigating them consciously, and also knowing how to, the word manipulate often has a negative connotation, but essentially manipulate them, which just means change their shape, right? Just like actively do something so that they become something else, or that they are used in a certain way. Such a powerful tool, such a game changer, that really, really helps with the bliss-based cycle of achievement. Because what happens then is that as you're working towards your goal, you're working with calm confidence, right? Calm confidence, I've talked about before, comes from doing what you said you're going to do, and being good at estimating what's in the realm of possibilities there, right? So often we get really fed up with ourselves when we set a goal that's too high, and we're like, I can do this in that amount of time, and then it turns out we can do that in this amount of time. That makes us feel not confident, right? So it's estimating our levels of achievement given a time frame, which really comes from expertly managing our emotions and energy, and also from intelligent action and intentional strategy, right? So you see how all of these link together. And the calmness is really key too, because you do not want to have your nervous system in the fight, flight, freeze response the whole time as you're working, because it's a really, really great strategy that from an evolutionary standpoint is so crucial to our survival, and is still really relevant today. Oftentimes people use examples of like a saber-toothed tiger chasing you. I don't think that ever happens to anyone these days. I mean, I might be wrong. But what does happen is that you step into the street and the car comes around the corner and you need to jump, right? That's a good response. Like, I'm really happy we have that. If you see a car out of nowhere coming towards you, you've got very quickly either like jump or not jump. If you're about to go onto the street and you see the car, it might be more sensible to freeze. I wouldn't recommend fighting it, but that is an option, right? So there are still very many everyday situations where the fight, flight, freeze response is super useful, like incredibly effective in avoiding death and like other injuries. So it's a very, very clever mechanism that we have. However, it's not suited to longer term threats. So if a threat is imminent and it's kind of like you jump or you don't, and that might mean injury or no injury, sensible thing. If it's like, well, we have 3 weeks to get this project in, so for those 3 weeks, you're just going to constantly feel yourself be full of adrenaline and full of cortisol, and your muscles are going to be tense, and your immune system is going to, go down. Your sexual energy, let's suppress that too. Digestion, let's not bother with that. Let's just like really amp it up for the muscles, which you might not need for this project, right? And let's also, in terms of how cognitive function, let's, lower the complex thoughts and really go for the emotions. That does not sound like a clever strategy to me. If you can explain to me why that is a clever strategy, I would love to hear it. But assuming you agree that that's not a clever strategy, learning to soothe the nervous system, to calm it, and to signal to it in a way that is like showing it rather than telling it that it is safe to stay and rest and digest. It's safe to stay calm, and that staying calm is not, paradoxically, a threat in and of itself, and that it doesn't mean you're not going to achieve your goal. Because very often we make links and we make associations that harm us a little more than they help us. And one of those associations is, if I'm not kind of like afraid to fail, or if I'm not like really amped up to like go get it and like do it and like high-fiving, like, yeah, if I'm not in that kind of spirit, then I might not feel any need to achieve, and then I won't do anything, and I'll be one of those lazy people, blah, 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 blah. Our mind will go places with that line of thought. So we often link, oh, we need to be stressed in order to achieve. There is some evidence that that's true to a certain extent, right? Like there is There are papers that say a certain level of stress is actually conducive to higher levels of performance. So it is not false necessarily, but the heightened level of stress is very often not what we talk about when we say we're stressed, right? This heightened level of stress that has been shown to actually amplify performance is more this kind of internal drive and desire, and there's like a little bit at stake and you kind of want to prove it, but it's more, there's more, that's why I put the desire. It's more of like, oh my God, can I do it? I don't know, I want to, ooh, right? That's very different to I have to somehow, it doesn't matter how. Very, very different energies. So normally when we talk about being stressed, we talk about this constricted kind of way, and we're not talking about this like bring it on, which can be fun and which can actually be a great mindset to be in. But you can say bring it on as well in a calm and confident way. So, not mutually exclusive. In any case, in this fourth step of the bliss-based cycle of achievement, you are working while maintaining calm inside, while maintaining confidence. So of course, you're still going to fluctuate and you might think, I might not make it, but you can deal with that because you're managing your emotions. And then you think, oh, I don't know if I've got the energy. Well, you can manage your energy, right? So it's a lot more aware of yourself. It's like you have someone with you who's making sure you're working optimally. That person is you, right? You're like a little team with yourself here. Works beautifully. So you succeed. This is same stuff to the other cycle. Once you've succeeded, we know we'll have this like little burst of excitement. That's normal. We get the, we're just so excited. So we get all the good feelings once we hit the goal. But those are super, super fleeting because the body can't hold that for that long. It's like, whee, like that, right? Sexual parallel, that is obvious, is an orgasm, right? Like it comes, it goes. Yes, female bodies can do things that male bodies can't, and that is wonderful. And you can also have longer and shorter ones, yes. But unlike pigs that can have an orgasm for up to 30 minutes, which is a very exciting fact, humans can't. So it means it's going to be a temporary spike in pleasure and feeling good and feeling joy. So what can you do about that? Just be like, oh, well, I guess that was it. No, you can consciously celebrate the achievement and anchor it in. This is something that when I work with clients and also with students I'm a little less obvious with it because there's less time to do it. But with clients, like we really go into it. It's that it feels really odd to celebrate yourself at first. And it feels really odd for so many different reasons that I won't go in right now, but it feels very unfamiliar. There are socially accepted celebrations, right? So if we do graduate from any sort of educational program, if we choose to merge our life with another person, if we create new life, there are some society approved celebrations, birthdays, where you've achieved staying alive for another year, which is exciting. So whenever there's other people involved and whenever there's a sort of external recognition of this is celebratory, like worthy, we tend to be okay with the celebrating. But if it's less obvious that this is like big enough to celebrate, or like something to celebrate at all, or like just something that you haven't really traditionally thought about celebrating, it can bring up a lot of stuff that I'm not going to go into now, but that is really fun to tease apart and to rewire and to work with. So let's put that aside and assume that we're on board with the idea of celebrating our achievements. Again, it's a bit of a hurdle sometimes because what we associate, so a lot of this, I hope you notice, is your mind having associated certain things as having to go together, and that creating all sorts of results for us. So one of the things we often associate is celebration goes with this kind of like wee feeling, right? Whether that includes alcoholic beverages or not, whether that includes music or not, doesn't really, or like movement or not, doesn't really matter. But like the feeling that we associate with celebration tends to be one that is kind of a high, fast paced, like yay, yay, yay kind of feeling, which, as I said, tends to be brief. So what we might want to think about instead is like how celebration can also be something that we're doing consciously in the same calm confidence that we've been working in already. So it's more instead of this like quick burst, it's more like sustained pleasure, which again, if we're linking this to sexuality, and this is also what I do in the tantra work, which isn't really a topic that I'm talking about right here, is this kind of like sustained level of pleasure that's a lot more calm, that's a lot more oxytocin based. So there's a lot more kind of deep-seated feelings of belonging, deep-seated feelings of kind of just this like love that isn't the kind of chemically induced exciting butterflies in the stomach love, but more of this like really feeling like you love someone or something or a situation or a memory, and just being very at peace with that, and kind of feeling yourself breathing more rather than breathing less, and really softening into it. Whereas the exciting bit tends to be more like tight in a positive sense, right? But this is more of a like breathing in the achievement and the success, feeling that as you're breathing it out, leaning back, taking time to like fully appreciate it, consciously go through it again and think about, okay, so it started with this desire, then I started developing my strategy, I was really intentional about it, I intelligently like took action, I kept like course correcting along the way in a really intentional way, I was like intelligent about the decisions I've made, there have been emotions that were sort of trying to distract me, I've been managing them, my energy, I was looking after it, I kept calm, I stayed confident, I succeeded. Like I would have never thought 3 years ago, I could never have imagined like doing this. This is incredible. Imagining what it would be like to tell a past version of yourself about what you've done, and like in your mind seeing them being super happy about it, and like just like in disbelief, all those sort of things that take a little bit of time and that are not this sort of like champagne in the air situation, can help you really anchor it into your nervous system and make it part of your updated identity, so you're taking it with you. Because in the original basic cycle of achievement, we often like drop the achievement and it becomes something the moment we reach it, we devalue it. And it's, if you think about it, it's really ironic, because you will put the goal on a pedestal, you think the goal will solve your problem, it's something you're looking at, this like holy grail, and you're just like in awe of it, you don't know if you're worthy of it, you don't know if you'll ever make it, you have so many doubts about it being possible for you, and the very second your hand like reaches it, you then think, well, this wasn't a big deal, anyone could have done it. I mean, the people who are now saying it's hard, like, I mean, I've done it, so clearly it can't be that hard, because if I've done it, then it must be possible because I'm not that special, blah, 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 blah. So it's diminishing something that you thought was out of reach, now is below you, and you're like, ah, right? And you may have had this if you've finished school and that seemed like super big deal, and you were just like, oh my God, like, I can't believe I've done it, da, 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 da. And then when you're at university and you look at someone else who's still at school, you might be like, oh, like, that's not a big deal. Like, please, I mean, wait until you get a bachelor's. And then like, you know, you can continue this chain forever. So it's very sad in a way, because we amp it up and then we have it and then we like throw it on the ground and we're like, not a big deal. So by consciously celebrating, and there's lots of ways that we can train ourselves to do this deliberately and to actually really enjoy it, we anchor in the achievement and we let it become part of who we are. So we carry it with us every step in the way, which means with every new achievement, we're kind of like building ourselves and building ourselves and building ourselves. And it doesn't just like fall through us and it's the next one, which is really, really fun. So when we do that, and when we actually really practice doing that, we do feel accomplished and we do feel fulfilled. And in the same scenario with the red Ferrari, let's say, right? If I'm going about it in a very conscious way where I just have the desire and I just want a shiny, flashy car and I just want to see myself driving in it, and I'm thinking like, oh, I don't know if I can. And there's no need for me. I'm living life perfectly fine not driving, I'm living life perfectly fine not having a car, but I'm just like, but what if I was the type of person who could actually drive, which to me is like that would be a huge deal, and would drive like a really shiny car? That would just be so much fun, wouldn't it? So I'm starting from a like, ooh, that's exciting, rather than I have to, right? Very different. Then I'm thinking about it, I'm being intelligent, I'm like, well, I've got to know how to drive before I actually get the car, because if I have the car and then I start to drive it and it's not going well, I'm going to be terribly upset, right? So I might be intelligent in terms of like what comes first, how do I do it? I might be intentional about thinking about like, okay, at what point in time does this make sense? What do I do if the driving lessons don't go to plan? What do I do if there's a conflict in time because I want to take driving lessons, but I also need to work to make the money? Like, what does that mean for the time frame? All these sort of things I would take into consideration and actually be okay with that being part of the process and not feeling like I'm wasting time doing that. As I'm going through, managing emotions would be a big one in that scenario, because I can tell you that I'm a very well, it's a bit of an adventure to drive with me, let's put it that way. So there would be many emotions to manage, and also a lot of energy, because I would have to think about, well, if I drive first and that's like nerve-wracking, am I then able to produce really good work after? Probably not. So like, how am I going to tweak that? What do I need in between? And this is important too. What do I need in between to sustain my energy levels? So do I need a day at a spa, for instance? Do I need to make sure that I'm still hanging out with friends? Could I maybe be practicing driving with a fearless, adventurous friend who would want to do this with me, and thereby have a lot of like fun during it as well? And indirectly also managing my emotions, because if I'm already in a good mood hanging out with a friend in the car, it's going to be a fun thing rather than with some higher driving instructor that maybe I don't get along with, or I feel afraid of, or like intimidated by, right? All of this would fall into the category of managing emotions and energy, and would also mean that we wouldn't sacrifice all other areas of life just to get there quickly, because we know that in order to have high levels of well-being, we have to still have time for our hobbies, and we have to still get a good night's sleep. That's such a big, huge factor in your emotions. Like how you feel is very related to how well you slept, for instance, and energy levels. I think it's obvious that that's also true. So it becomes more of a holistically embedded goal within your life, making sure you stay happy and healthy throughout. And then as I'm working with calm confidence, I might notice that I'm, like I said, I was going to take lessons, and yes, they haven't gone the way that I was hoping for, but I still stuck with it and I still did it. And then I gave myself a little bit more time with getting the money for it, because it took a bit longer, but like I know I will in the end. And if it's not Christmas, it might be Valentine's Day, and that is just as exciting, right? So maintaining your levels of belief in yourself, and also regulating the nervous system. And then I might get to consciously celebrate it. And what's really good about the conscious celebration is that sometimes it's worth to plan them in advance, because while you're still not sure you can get there, it seems more enticing to envision the celebration and put them in place. Whereas if you've already achieved them, then sometimes we feel like, oh no, now it seems silly to plan something, right? So it might make sense to plan it in advance. And I might have a celebration that involves other people. Like it could be really fun to have other people, they drive them around in this car and I like share my joy with them, and it forms a memory, and we can, I don't know, take pictures, have a meal, or like whatever it might be that will. I really do not want a Ferrari, but in this hypothetical scenario, that would really anchor it in for me. Maybe I'm one of those people that's like desperate to take a picture, like sitting on it and just being like, that's my car, and doing those sort of things. So planning that in advance would get me really excited and would additionally motivate me. And then would also make sure that I'm forming a very strong episodic memory. Episodic memories are always context dependent. And so that means the more context we have, the more we involve scent and things that are visual and things that we get to feel and things that we get to taste. So maybe I have a certain beverage that I'm drinking, something red to match the car, right? Maybe I'm having like, I don't know, cherries because those are red too, like whatever it might be. But the more senses I involve, maybe there's music because that's a really good memory cue. Maybe there's certain people, all of those sort of things are going to make it this event rather than just something I tick off my list. And then I get to feel fully accomplished and fulfilled, because getting the car all of a sudden isn't just about getting the car, but it's about like who I am as I'm going about it. Like, what's my motivation? I just want something. That's a big thing, right? If we reach a level of self-worth where we can say, I really desire something, and therefore I'm going to go get it, that's already coming in at a higher self-worth level than I need to in order to be okay, right? Different basis. And then the whole way throughout, you are becoming a new iteration of your own identity, because you are faced with some some decisions, you're faced with some things that don't go right, you're faced with looking at your emotions and your energy quite consciously, you're faced with your levels of calmness and confidence, and you're faced with how do you celebrate, do you actually want to, are you going to try to run away from it, will you still manage? So there's a lot there that will just be lessons for life, and that will make you into a more evolved and more kind of wise version of yourself. So it's not so much it was the car and now I'm super happy, but it was more through this process I've learned a lot about myself, and I got to experience life in a very conscious way, where I was actively looking like what areas of my life are really important at this. Like, oh, I noticed I've been taking driving lessons and that means I didn't have enough time to spend with friends. That actually makes me unhappy. Oh, I'm now aware that this time with friends is really important to me. And then I found a solution by combining the driving lessons by doing them with friends. So now I know this about myself, right? It becomes a whole different kind of achievement. It's a very holistic achievement. It's a very balanced achievement. And it's a very kind of going to the core achievement, rather than something that externally looks cool on a list if you do like a little check after it. So this was a lot to listen to. The bliss-based cycle of achievement shows kind of the process of serial achievement that is sustainable, and that is not an empty promise that you kind of keep falling back into believing could be true next time around, but rather is a way of continuously choosing to expand to a next level, being fully okay with where you were, and just being ready for something new. So it's an active challenging the status quo. It's a decision that says that instead of kind of living my life exactly on this plateau that I'm on already, I choose to see what's out there. And as soon as it's a choice, it also becomes a little bit of a game, which takes out a lot of the fears, a lot of the things that often block us, and a lot of those frustrations that come if we think we might not get it, because there isn't that much at stake. Like, you're already fine how you are, you're already okay with the life that you're leading, and you're just choosing more. So if that doesn't work, then that wouldn't be the end of the world. Even if we don't consciously think that, that's going to make a difference to how your nervous system and your mind is going to respond the whole way through. And now you might think, okay, but there are some things I actually need to achieve. That's a fair point, and there's really good strategies in dealing with those kind of beliefs that may be rooted in truth. There are some examples where that is very much rooted in truth. Very often, though, even if it is rooted in truth, there are still perspective shifts that help us make it less of a black and white thing in our head, and that kind of, again, when we're going back to what I said earlier, help us to not get into this kind of state, but like help us get into this kind of state, which will always result in more effective and efficient work, because our body is not blocking itself so much, and it's allowing creative thoughts to come up that are only able to come to us if we are not in fight, flight, or freeze, because fight, flight, or freeze will create a tunnel vision and try to just fix the problem, and not really allow yourself to dare to fully breathe and fully be in the moment until it's accomplished. And if it's a kind of a long-term goal, then that does have repercussions. So I hope this was enjoyable. As an overview, I'm going to just stop share. There we go. I hope that was enjoyable. I am always incredibly pleased to hear any sort of questions, feedbacks, comments, any sort of associations that I may have sparked, anything that warrants clarification, any further up questions that maybe have come up for you as you were listening. And therefore, please feel super, super welcome to just write to me and just ask, just share. Always treating everything confidential. Like, I don't share who reached out or who asked what questions, because I very much believe in privacy, and I wouldn't like that myself. So feel free to share. If you're interested in, I've been asked recently, like, what the options are of working with me. There's 3 options, and I'm just going to very briefly outline them. If you want details on those, let me know as well. So one option is the courses that I've only offered once thus far. So I don't yet know if I'm going to do this a lot because I run courses within organizations, institutions of higher learning, and companies and corporations, which I really love because in a way I'm talking to the stakeholder in the organization. We talk about what's a good fit. I kind of adapt to the needs of that place, and then I run them internally. That I really, really love and have a lot of fun with. But I don't yet know if I'm loving opening them to the like an undefined group where it's just different individuals coming together. So if that is something that is interesting to you, mindful mindset is something that I've recently advertised, which is kind of tapping into developing the foundations for the bliss-based achievement. So it's kind of looking at how do we create an awareness of the present moment that really elevates the quality of our life in a way that doesn't take a lot of time and that doesn't feel like you have to meditate a lot. Because one of those ideas about mindfulness is often that we have to, spend hours sitting ideally on some sort of mountaintop, and we're just sitting there not moving, not a single thought on our mind, and that is what being mindful is all about. When in fact, while that can be part of it, and while a mindfulness practice is a wonderful thing to cultivate and develop, it really is about bringing attention and awareness to you living your life. So it's not so much the half an hour that you might be sitting somewhere meditating, it's the 23 hours and 30 minutes of the rest of the day, well, subtracting sleep, and how you are aware of what you're doing, how much of it is an autopilot, how much of it are you actually intentionally navigating, and how you can up your level of enjoyment of life and your productivity, and really kind of develop a sense of control and power over how you live your life in like hardly any time at all. So it's a great program. I've been running it for 2 years. Oh, it feels longer. I've been running it for 2 years. It is great. And that is the only group offer that I have yet made outside of organizational context, and that I might do again. The second option is Present for Pleasure, which is one-on-one, so just you and me on the phone for 3 months. It will become a 4-month program at some point, but not quite yet. And it is a really lovely way to elevate your sense of pleasure, which I am saying can mean many things to many people. So it is rooted amongst, tons of psychology research. It is also rooted in tantric practices. So if it's something that you are comfortable with, it can explore a lot of sexuality, and it is a very mind-blowing way to go about it, because if we tap into our sexual potential, and if we kind of look at a lot of our beliefs and our ways of relating to our sexuality, and kind of consciously looking at that and kind of rewiring some stuff, it is the most efficient way to upgrade the quality of your life in its entirety, in my opinion. Some people might disagree, but because it's such a potent energy, and because so many of us have such deep-rooted beliefs around sexuality, there's a lot of blaming and shaming and like guilt, and there's a lot under the surface. So from my experience, and from what I've seen and witnessed and learned, it's a really great key that will unlock pleasure in all areas of life, completely unrelated to sexuality. So in work, right, in work related settings, we don't want any sexuality floating around, unless this is part of your profession. But assuming it's not, we don't want to like have sexual energy sort of like you in the office. Normally this is nothing that we would be intrigued by. But if you have allowed yourself to experience more sexual pleasure in a conscious way, in a guilt-free, enjoyable, kind of really wholesome way, that also automatically means pleasure in non-sexual context is a lot easier for you to detect, to allow, and to amplify. So it really helps to become aware of the pleasure that's already available to you. And again, this can also be completely non-sexual. I've done this with people where like we never spoke about anything sexual whatsoever. So that is a very available option. You lift the ceiling of how much joy and happiness you allow. And it sounds a little bit ridiculous at first to hear this. I can really recommend a book which is called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, who I think put it very, very well. It's one of those self-development books I can really highly recommend, where most of us have an internal, all of us really have an internal representation of how much joy, happiness, pleasure it is safe to receive before it gets dangerous. And it can be different for different areas in life. And it's different for different individuals and different points in life. But very few of us are aware of it. And our brains are so clever that they often protect us from too much bliss, because it fears if there's too much bliss, there will be negative consequences. As I said earlier, within the bliss-based cycle of achievement, we often fear that if we allow ourselves to be happy, there is no need to achieve. If there's no need to achieve, the result must be that we're sort of lazy, just hanging around, achieving nothing, doing nothing with our life, just kind of being there. That is a deep-seated belief that a lot of people carry around with them, whether we're consciously aware of them or not. And so that means that we often limit our bliss and we make sure we don't get too happy. We're thinking that if I'm having a really good time, something bad's going to happen next because somehow it needs to balance, right? Those sort of beliefs, most of us carry around with us. And just imagine for a second what it would be like if we could let go of that, and if we could really just the pleasure that's already there, actually allow ourselves to see it, because we're really good at like not really acknowledging it, and not just to see it, but to then like really feel it, and like feel it for longer and feel it more deeply and feel it more all encompassing and like all cells of your body and your complete mind, and you're just like, you know, like reveling in the pleasure. And then imagine allowing yourself to even let it become bigger and grow and evolve and expand, and just the idea of experiencing more pleasure than you can currently imagine being possible. I think like it gets me really excited and like blows my mind, because it's possible, and you can see that like there's a ceiling and then you crush it, and then there's a new ceiling and you're like, I can't crush that ceiling, and then you can. So it's a wonderful program. It is very compact in the sense of sessions being rather short, just like 25 minutes per session, and it is content based. So there are certain topics we're going to talk about in a certain sequence that kind of builds up, and overall will just make you a lot more present for pleasure, as the title suggests. And then in addition to that, the third and final option of working with me right now is the one-on-one mindset mentoring. So that's the most high level intensive way of working with me. It's one-on-one, once a week, 50-minute conversations on the phone. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, which is really wonderful. The minimum of that is 3 months, because I've seen, and a lot of evidence suggests that like 3 months is a pretty good time to shift foundational mindset structures and belief systems, up to a year. So depending on your individual desires and what you're envisioning, we might think about what makes most sense in terms of a time frame. And this is not as structured. So there is a process, there's a 4-part process that I walk through with everyone. That's very beautiful. And that really blows, like, this might sound a little bit cheesy, but like every time I see it working, I'm in awe, because like it's one thing to know that it's working, and then you see it working and you're just like, wow, like it's just, and it, like I could talk about this for days, so I won't, but essentially there's 4 steps, and I'm not going to go into them too much because I think that takes too long, and it's also nice not to know what's coming and then just to be pleasantly surprised. But essentially we open your horizon and your mindset, and we kind of like, we similarly to the pleasure, but more in terms of like our beliefs, we lift what we think is possible, and we really expand on that, and we see that the horizon is not the limit, and there's like so many more ways to think about ourselves and our lives and how we go about it. And then we get into more like a structural approach to looking at every single day and how we are organizing it and how it's put together and how we can effectively fine-tune that to meet our actual desires, and connecting the mind to the body in that process. I'm really trying to make this very vague because I like the mystery of it, so I'm not going to give too much away. But that's very powerful, because then we're connecting mind to the body. Then we're going into creating longer term visions and really daring to go places in our mind that we would have previously deemed unsafe for us to go, because the risk of failure and of sort of disappointment would be too high to our subconscious. But at this point in the process, like, you're fine doing it. So then we get to like create this really, really cool, very thought through place of where you're walking towards. And then we get to implement that, and you learn how to expertly navigate your emotions and your energy on the way, and you get to like embody everything we've worked through. And in the end, like, it's just so beautiful. It's just so beautiful to see. If that's something that interests you, do reach out. We do need to talk together beforehand to make sure that it's a good fit. It only works for people who are high achievers or very determined high achievers in the making, and who have already decided that they are ready to up level, and who have that internal fire, right? It might be that the internal fire is there, but the flame is a little small at the moment. That's absolutely fine. That's okay. But yeah, there needs to be this internal motivation and this desire that I talked about to excel and to keep excelling, but to do so blissfully. So if that was a little fast, feel free to watch it again. But just to summarize, there is the group offers, which I tend to do business to business. So if you're working in a company or an organization, this might be something that's interesting to you or someone you work with. Feel free to get in touch. The other option is the Present for Pleasure, which is just 3 months, and it's kind of compact, 25 minutes a week, going through a sequence of steps to elevate the pleasure that you are feeling in your body every single day. And then it's the Mindset Mentoring, which is 50 minutes a week for 3 to 12 months, depending on what both of us think is best for the given situation. And that is really, all my knowledge comes out in such wonderful ways, and it's such a joy, because we're basically like walking through those months together. And I only work with 5 people at a time for that, because I have you in my head the whole time, and I'm very aware of what you're doing, and I'm very, very connected to the kind of development that is, I could just talk about this for days, so I won't. If any of this is interesting to you, please let me know. And I always love to hear from you. I hope this was interesting, and I wish you a wonderful day. Goodbye.